So, welcome back. Our third speaker today is John K. Kamakaviva Ole Osorio, a wonderful colleague and friend he has been over the years. John is a professor at the Kamakakuokalani Center for Hawaiian Studies at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. He holds a PhD in history from the University of Hawaii, and at Kamakakuokalani, he's developed a number of courses in history, literature, law as culture, music as historical texts, and research methodologies for and from indigenous peoples. He's got some wonderful publications out, including The Value of Hawaii, Knowing the Past and Shaping the Future, which he co-edited and authored, and Dismembering Lahui, A History of the Hawaiian Nation to 1887. John is also a composer and singer and has been a Hawaiian music recording artist since 1975, and I do wish I had brought a guitar for him. John's presentation is titled Nation or Governance, A Critical Choice. Please welcome John Osorio.
Aloha nui kākou. I'm going to read this presentation. It's one of the only ways I can absolutely make sure that I don't go to 40 minutes. I do want to keep this under time, but I also have a faith and trust in words and language, and I believe that things that you express with words have great depth and meaning. You are held to the things that you say. We have a saying in Hawaii, I ka'olelo keola, I ka'olelo kamake, in language is life, both life and death. So pardon me if this seems formal at times, but it's especially important for me to get it right in an audience like this of so many people whom I do not know. The title of this is Governance or Nation, and I think that you can already begin to see the differences between these kinds of words, what you are actually describing with a word like governance, what you are actually describing when we think of a word like nation. And just from the outset, you'll notice that I do use many of the words from our own language. And when I do, I will define them and make sure that I call attention to them. The word in Hawaii for government is aupuni. The word for nation, the people, the assembly, is lahui. And I'll be using both of these throughout. History matters. History is not just what we perceive our past to be, definitely not what we wish the past had been. In the end, fact matters. Knowing the sequence of events, knowing what was done and said, knowing that past is how we understand and make sense of the present. A clear, intelligible vision of the present, what is going on around us, also matters. We gaze back, we look around, and we chart a course that takes us onward. As a people, we could conceivably sail anywhere. We are on a voyage, and actually the Hokulea is proving this as we speak, but metaphorically, we are a people on a voyage that was charted nearly 200 years ago when the Kanaka Maoli, the native people, in the throes of a horrific population collapse, allowed our chiefs, our ali'i, to lead us into a new future that broke with 1,000 years of tradition and ushered in new religious beliefs, new and strange economic practices, and a new kind of authority, constitutional law. That placed the responsibility, constitutional law, placed the kuleana, that's our word for responsibility, for privilege, for mandate. It placed that kuleana for ruling and maintaining our nation, not just in the hands of the ali'i, the chiefs, but in the hands of the maka'ainana, the people of the land, the farmers, the fishermen, and ultimately, it also placed that kuleana in the hands of people who came from other places, from America, from Europe mostly, but even those more recently arrived as contract labor from Asia. All were welcomed. All were invited to join Kanaka Maoli in their commitment to the nation, their loyalty to the monarch, and a new state was added to what would eventually become a global family of nations. We took great risks as a Lahui, as a nation, allowing people who did not share our ancestry or our culture to belong to this nation. And one result of that risk-taking was that some of those who managed to enrich themselves with great estates and even greater estimations of their own worth betrayed this country. They were a small minority, these people, even among the other foreigners who were also Hawaiian subjects, but they were wealthy and influential with American politicians, and together with American political and naval power, seized our nation, humiliated our queen, and confiscated the lands legally belonging to her and to our government. The United States of America was never an unwitting partner in the chain of events, like Williamson was describing earlier. They were never an unwitting partner in this chain of events, and worse, many Americans insisted that its own ideals prohibited it from taking over another country that had never threatened theirs in any way. But realpolitik and strategic military and economic considerations, all of these essentially overwhelmed your country's better instinct. And the US territorialized Hawaii in 1898, taking over all of our national lands and the property of the monarch in the process. Representatives of the United States have not sought to ameliorate, but rather to disguise this theft ever since. In the Territorial Organic Act, the US permitted Hawaiians to vote in the first elections, while not actually requiring them to renounce their own nationality and identify themselves as American citizens. In the 1921 Hawaiian Homestead Act, the US created, I'll put it here, this is a wonderful picture of the commissioners who put together the Hawaiian Homestead Act in 1921, standing outside of a legislative office building, and there's the same snow I see out here on the ground. I'm feeling a real kinship with Kuhio folks as we speak. In the 1921 Hawaiian Homestead Act, the US created a mechanism for offering homesteads and agricultural leaseholds, but not as a just restoration of lands taken from Hawaiian nationals, but as a helping hand to a native people who, like other native peoples in America, were struggling with their own losses. And here I really would like to insert the gravity of saying these words in this museum, in this place. Because while we are not America's native people, we certainly do have many things in common with the native people of this land. And one of them is this colonial history. So native people were struggling with their own losses, having lost millions of acres of land to white settlers. American Indians were portrayed as failures, unable to keep up with American society. And similarly, in the Hawaiian Homes Act, blood quantum rules were enacted by the Congress, recognizing only those of 50% blood quantum as entitled to be beneficiaries of this act. And in one fell swoop, it's one of the most efficient kinds of colonial moves you can imagine. The Hawaiian Homestead Act, because of the blood quantum rule, first, it limits the people who are actually entitled to apply and therefore can gain these lands. Second, because of the intermarriage that was already noted between Native Hawaiians, Kanaka Maoli, and other groups of people, It would only be a matter of time before we would marry ourselves out of legitimacy for this act. And the third thing, which is by far the worst part of this efficiency, is that those people who had more blood, more Hawaiian blood, were thus characterized as more needing of the assistance, more incompetent. We were classified like wards, people who had deficiencies. Nothing says more clearly than the HHA that the more Hawaiian you are, the more assistance you require from the society. Throughout the 20th century, the American government in Hawaii created laws and educational policies designed to produce not just assimilation, but a sense of loyalty and patriotism to the American state by obscuring any reference to the fact that the US had supported an insurgency against the Hawaiian government in 1893 and then had accepted the spoils of that insurgency. At the time of the statehood vote in Hawaii, this American education had affected 3 generations of our people who had come to have wildly divergent ideas about this history, with the vast majority of us having no other information than that Hawaii had naturally evolved from some kind of makeshift kingdom to a fully fledged state in the most powerful and respected country in the world. A significant contribution to this indoctrination was the replacement of Olelo Hawaii, of Hawaiian language, with American English as the national language and the language of education. But remember, I said that we were on a course that was charted for us before the Mo'i, before the king, signed the first Constitution in 1840. Despite a shamefully constructed distortion of our history and demoralizing policies, despite the steady and spectacular loss of political power, as Hawaii-born Japanese and later Haole transplants from the US replaced Kanaka Maoli as the major voting groups in Hawaii, there was an equally spectacular burst of political energy, fueled by revivals in cultural practices, language, and also fueled by resentment of the economic and environmental changes that unabated tourism and US military spending brought to Hawaii in the 1970s. The Hawaiian movement, which was really hundreds of movements, advocated for protection of our vanishing ways of life, and also advocated for established communities over new speculative real estate opportunities, and even challenged the US military's destructive and unconscionable use of our lands, not just on Kaho'olawe, but in Makua, Mokapu, and lately on Haleakala. In a supremely important way, our diverse political and social movements are what our Lahui has come to be. For almost as many generations as we have been sidelined by American deceptions, our people have, since the 1960s, claimed a kuleana, a responsibility, an obligation for these lands and for our culture, for our sense of history, and for our destiny. And while some of us have grown old and others have passed, we have been seeing young people take up the struggle to restore a Kanaka Maoli authority and political power on our land. Consider the sequence of events. Land struggles on Oahu in the early 1970s. The Kaho'olawe struggle from 1975 to the end of the century. Hawaiian language revival and immersion schools since 1983. Protection of our burial sites and remains since 1988. Access and protection of subsistence and cultural access to the land, highlighted by successful opposition to Senate Bill 8 in 1998. And this was a huge state legislative fiasco in which a couple of senators decided it would be a good idea that if Hawaiians were to have the right to access different parts of the forest and different parts of the land that were not on private property, in order to gain subsistence items as they had historically and as they were guaranteed under kingdom law. Senate Bill 8 sought to force everyone to identify themselves and apply for licenses. I wish you could have been there. Hundreds of people convene on the Capitol. Hundreds of people who were actually part of the numerous numbers of hula halau, of dance schools, hula dance schools in Hawaii, came and played their pahu and chanted for a 24-hour period from day to night and into the next day. And the Senate withdrew their foolish bill. What else? Wait, that's right. Kalahui. You know, this is a really, really interesting thing. I'm going to talk in a few minutes about the issues that were raised by both Williamson and by Clyde, and focus a little bit of attention on Kana'i Oluwalu and Na'iaupuni. You know, the argument over whether Hawaii should be a nation within a nation or whether Hawaii should seek independence from the United States, I think these are really important questions and ones which we have been wrestling with not just since 2000 and the Akaka Bill, but going back to 1987 when Kalahui Hawaii was formed by, you know, just a grassroots organization of people stemming out of a meeting in Keaukaha in a small church that couldn't accommodate everybody. It eventually created a constitution, a legislature, judges, and it had a citizenship of more than 20,000 people. That was a legitimate form of nation building. It didn't begin with the state of Hawaii. It did not begin with the US government. It came from the land. It came from the people. So Kalahui is an example of the beginning of this. Kalahui also, and here's just a sample of what Kalahui stood for. It had its own constitution. It was a nation within a nation. It required Hawaiian ancestry in order to vote in Kalahui elections and to represent. It had claims on the crown and government lands that had been taken by the Republic and transferred to the United States. It had profoundly important principles at the very beginning of the Constitution. In the preamble of this Constitution, calling for complete demilitarization in Hawaii, no military forces, and on Kalahui lands at least there would be no private property. There would only be the national trust lands. So Kalahui's sort of definition, right, of sovereignty was focused in on the restoration of a kind of Hawaiian cultural entity that could come back and live again. And it was recognized in the 1980s and 1990s that this was something that needed to happen. But it doesn't end with Kalahui. And Kalahui was quite active in the Onipa'a commemorations. That's a word you can use, Clyde, not celebration, you're right. But commemoration of the 100th anniversary of the loss of our kingdom, the humiliation of our queen, and the taking of our national lands. Almost half of all of the lands of Hawaii really wind up being snatched from the queen and from that legislature and given to the United States. So Onipa'a was a call for people to come and dedicate themselves to self-government, to the reinstatement of our government. And the form it has taken, and I will acknowledge, it's been a really interesting ride since 1993. I shouldn't have, well, I thought about, do you really want to do PowerPoints? They're clumsy, they're goofy, and you keep forgetting where you are in your text. Here we go. Not only has there been that kind of nation building, nation within a nation movement, but as people have referred to before, there have been people, Kanaka Maoli, who have taken, the cause of occupation, Hawaii being occupied by a foreign power, the ongoing sovereignty of the Hawaiian nation. They have taken this as far as The Hague, and for this, we owe a great debt to people like Keanu Sai. He wasn't just some ordinary scholar. He was someone who essentially brought this interpretation of the international world and Hawaii's place in it right front and center to scholars like me who had no idea that these things were true. So um, we have all of these, and by the way, what Keanu Sai's movement has led to has been really the creation of a number of kingdoms, a number of governments in Hawaii who all basically claim that they are legitimate representations of the Lahui, of the Hawaiian nation, including reinstated nation of Hawaii. There are a number of them now, and I don't exactly know how many, but there's, I don't know, more than 8. And what some people have portrayed as disunity, because they all won't agree to be under one government, what some people have portrayed as disunity and confusion, I see as a vital, informed, and diverse movement to self-correct 100 years of colonial-style education and suppression of our culture and our national identity. This diverse and vigorous movement is what has, in the past 50 years, obstructed the attempt by powerful players in the government, business and labor, to sell Hawaii, literally and figuratively. And since the first rendition of the Akaka Bill in 2000, the Democratic Party has sought to move the Lahui, as an obstruction by making a creature of its own, something that can claim to be the sole voice of the Hawaiian people and with which future arrangements can be made. And the pilikia, the trouble, the problem with Kana'i'oluwalu and Na'iaupuni is that they have both created as much cynicism as hope in the Hawaiian community, and thus have contributed to an actual disunity and not just a theoretical one. Claiming to be able to produce an entity that can speak with one voice for our people is not at all credible, not at this point, given our history, our current reality, and the way these agencies have gone about their work. Na'iaupuni's claim that it can be independent of Act 195, and by the way, I'm saying things now that Clyde would probably not agree with. But we had meetings with the people who were organizing this Native Hawaiian convention back about 6 or 7 months ago. And given assurances by these individuals that Na'iaupuni didn't necessarily have to simply be an agency to move people toward federal recognition. It could actually be something that, if the delegates decided to move in that direction, could create an independent nation, could argue for independence. So its claim that it could be independent of the act that created it was simply not believable. Not just because of the wording of Act 195, but because of the interference by the Department of the Interior to smooth the way to federal recognition, and federal recognition only. Na'iaupuni, and I'm talking about the organization that has created this conference, this AHA, which will begin next week. Na'iaupuni's greatest failure has been its insistence on a timeline that has forced Hawaiians to choose something that has no clear objective, and to make that choice within an arbitrary deadline, all the while intimating that this was somehow our last chance to participate in the building of our nation. It is the coercive nature of this process that ultimately dooms it to failure. This, I believe, because I know our people and our history, and I have seen us choose to eat stones before. Many of you this morning may have been out in the rotunda listening to that beautiful music. And I heard Kaulananapua sung more than once. Maybe it wasn't the same group, but we were sort of on a different floor. But I heard that song twice at least. And there's a line in that song, right? There's a line in that song that says, "We will not take the money of the government. We would rather eat stones than lose our independence." Aole ai, aole makoa e mina mina, I ka puka lao ki aupuni. We will not take the government salaries, the government pay. Ualava mako I ka pohaku. It is enough, the stones, the mystical food of the land. Coercion has been the hallmark of this whole process, from the legislation's insistence that our own resources at OHA, at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, pay for the role and the convention to the tune now of more than $6 million. To Kana'i Oluwalu's request to roll over names from other Hawaiian enrollments into its own. And now Na'iaupuni seduces independence supporters into signing up, claiming that independence too is a possible outcome of the convention. And that's where skepticism really should turn to outrage. At the time when these promises were being made, we were supposed to have elected 40 delegates out of just under 200 people who were running for delegate. We're not really certain how many people had actually registered to take part in this election, somewhere under 130,000. Many of them, as I said, rolled over from other databases. I don't know to this day how many people actually voted in this. All of this was put on hold when the US Supreme Court, responding to a neocon suit in Hawaii, basically raised questions about whether or not, right, having an election for a governing entity might be rubbing the 14th and 15th Amendment the wrong way. So what Na'iaupuni has chosen to do is basically seat all of the delegates. There is therefore no election. It's basically anyone who has signed up. And they are the ones who get to essentially guide the process. And Clyde, I seriously hope that people are listening to the things that you say, that this cannot go forward. This cannot be seen as an actual legal act. And I would take this further. Can't be seen as a legal act, not just without the validation of Kanaka Maoli in Hawaii, but without the validation of all the people who live in Hawaii. Here's the problem. We have delegates who have not been elected. They're supposed to construct a government. Really, if they're pursuing independence, they're going to construct a government for 1.2 million people in Hawaii, Pai'aina. Hawaiians number less than 250,000. So they're going to create a government for all of us that perhaps takes us away from the United States. And they're going to do this without consultation of all of those other people who are not Kanaka Maoli. And they believe that this can be done peacefully. I actually had respect for this process when I thought it was only about the pursuit of federal recognition. That at least made sense. There are people who want this in Hawaii. There are people who are working for this in Hawaii. There are also thousands, an increasing number of people in Hawaii, including Kanaka Maoli, who are completely opposed to federal recognition. We do not want to be a nation within a nation. We believe that our legacy and our destiny is to be independent again, and all we need is time. The state of Hawaii's Act 195 was completely clear in its language and intent. Recognize the Kanaka Maoli as the indigenous people of the state and provide the means to create a governing entity that can seek formal federal recognition with the US government. The Department of Interior's rulemaking draft is even clearer. A Native Hawaiian government will not be eligible for the same resources as American Indians, and it may not challenge federal jurisdiction over military lands. Act 195 provides a path well worn by hundreds, no, thousands of agreements with Native American nations who would eventually all succumb to the US claim of dominion over their lands and their fate. Many succumbed only after murder and terror pacified them. We have voyaged in difficult waters before, and I know that we have all had our moments when we simply wanted some small piece of what has been stolen from us restored. But I believe we're in this struggle for the long haul, and the long haul is what is required for us to resecure our country peacefully and inevitably. This long struggle is also what has shaped us as a people who have known the deepest kind of betrayal and have maintained our dignity and, I think, our sense of purpose. Our people are on a 200-year journey of nation building and rebuilding. We have time on our side, but only so long as we continue to fight. We have right on our side, but only as long as we remember. Thank you.